utpādotpāda mūlotpādasya kevalam utpādotpādam maulo janayate punaḥ.
Utpādotpāda utpādo mūlotpādasya kevalam utpādotpādam utpādo maulo janayate punaḥ. MMK chapter 7 verse 4. Only the genesis of the original genesis is the genesis of genesis. The original genesis, again, begets the genesis of genesis. So this is a spectacularly ontological verse. It's a philosophical speculation about the ontological meaning of utpāda. So utpāda literally means ut means up and pad means to go or to fall. So utpāda means going up or falling up, hence arising, being born, coming forth. So if we're talking about it as an action, it means going up. If we're talking about it in terms of how the world comes to be in a non-empty scenario, then it means genesis, being generated, being origination, being born. So that's why pratitya samutpada means samutpada means springing up together. So arising, dependent, pratitya by going back to something. So what the Buddha meant by pratitya samutpada is emptiness. Pratitya samutpada was the way the Buddha expressed in whatever language it was, which would have predated Sanskrit. The Buddha would not have said pratitya samutpada. He would have said words that are represented in Sanskrit as pratitya samutpada. But what the Buddha had realized was something about practice in the middle way. In the middle way of what? In the middle way of two views about existence, two ontological views. Okay, so but the Buddha was interested in practice in the middle way. He wasn't interested in the two ontological views. So this verse belongs to the opponent, and he is interested in ontological discussion of genesis, of how things come to be. So that's what the first three verses of this chapter, as I read them, are not interested in ontology. They're Nāgārjuna talking about lakshana, something in practice, aiming to hit the mark, targeting. That's what they are below the surface. But this verse is ontological. And the next three, we know it's the opponent because the next three verses, verse 5, 6 and 7, Nāgārjuna says te, which means for you, in your scheme. And then in verse 8, the opponent comes back with another ontological speculation. So this verse is clearly belonging to the opponent. And so utpāda is best translated not as going up, but genesis. It's really a kind of a speculation about the Big Bang, which is the original genesis, mūlotpāda. So mūla means root, and as in mūla madhyamaka karika, root verses of the middle in root verses. So mūla means root, or what's fundamental, what's original. So mūlotpāda, mūla plus utpāda, mūlotpāda is the original genesis, the root going up, the root arising, the original genesis with capital letters like Big Bang. So mūlotpādasya is genitive singular, and utpādo mūlotpādasya, so utpādaḥ, nominative singular masculine, before mūla becomes utpādo. Utpādo mūlotpādasya is the genesis of the original genesis. Utpādo mūlotpādasya kevalam. Kevalam means only. It's indeclinable participle, kevalam, only. So only the genesis of the original genesis is the genesis of genesis. The genesis of genesis is a compound. Utpada plus utpādaḥ becomes utpādotpāda. And before the of utpādo, the visaga is dropped, so it becomes utpādotpāda. Utpādotpāda. So the genesis of genesis. So we work from the English again. Only kevalam, the genesis of the original genesis, utpādo mūlotpādasya, is the genesis of genesis. Utpādotpāda. So from the Sanskrit, utpādotpāda, utpādo mūlotpādasya kevalam. Utpādotpāda, the genesis of genesis. Utpādo mūlotpādasya is the original genesis. Is the genesis of the original genesis. Kevalam, only. Utpādotpāda, utpādo mūlotpādasya kevalam. Only the genesis of the original genesis is the genesis of genesis. Second line, the original genesis, so utpādo maulo, so that's nominative singular masculine of utpāda. Utpāda is utpādaḥ. Before maula, that becomes utpādo. And then original here is the vriddhi form, the strong form of mūla becomes maula. So again, it means original. And it's nominative singular masculine, maulaḥ. Before janayate, that becomes with sandhi maulo. So utpādo maulaḥ, the original genesis. Again is punaḥ at the end of the verse. So it means again or emphatic. Begets janayate. That's third person singular causative of jan, to be born. Jan means to be born, but causative sense, to cause, to be born, to beget. And the genesis of genesis again is utpādotpāda, utpādotpāda, but in this case it's accusative. So it's utpādotpādam. So it's the object in this verse. It's the subject of the previous verse, so it's nominative, utpādotpāda. In here, it's in the second line, it's accusative, utpādotpādam. So the original genesis, utpādo maulaḥ, again, punaḥ, begets janayate, the genesis of genesis. Utpādotpādam. Utpādotpādam, utpādo maulo janayate punaḥ. The original genesis again begets the genesis of genesis. Only the genesis of the original genesis is the genesis of genesis. The original genesis again begets the genesis of genesis. So this opponent conceives of something like the Big Bang, which is the start of everything. And I find it difficult to get my head around it, partly because I'm not really interested in whatever the opponent's trying to say. I'll quote what I wrote about this 2 years ago when I went back to the Pali Suttas, which seem to be relevant. The title of this chapter is ostensibly Investigation of Genesis, Stasis and Dissolution. Investigation of what the philosophers call an ontological problem. That's a problem having to do with existence. But what Nāgārjuna below the surface is actually going to encourage us to explore in soteriological practice is arising or going up, staying still and cessation. The Manual of Buddhist Terms and Doctrines by Janayate Mahatera. Mahatera means great brother, so he's a Pali monk, originally German monk who wrote the Manual of Buddhist Terms and Doctrines. The Manual of Buddhist Terms and Doctrines by Janayate Mahatera states that Chittakana, Sanskrit Chittakshana, the consciousness moment, is the time occupied by one single stage in the perceptual process or cognitive series. This moment again is subdivided into the genetic, Pali upada, Sanskrit utpāda, the static, titi in Pali, stiti in Sanskrit, and dissolving, banga, moment. So in his, end of quote, in his appendix, Venerable Janayate notes that these three phases in a moment of consciousness, i.e. upada, titi, banga, are probably mentioned for the first time in the commentaries. That's not in the suttas that record what the Buddha said, but the Abhidharma commentaries. To continue the quote, but there is a close parallel in two sutta texts which may have been the source for that teaching of a three-phase moment of consciousness. Okay, end of quotes. The first of those sutta texts that Venerable Janayate refers to is Anguttara 347, Anguttara Nikaya 347. It consists of two short passages on the subject of what is called in Sanskrit samskrita, the contrived or contriving, or the confected or confecting. That is what is usually translated as the conditioned. Bhikkhus, this is quote translated by me from the Anguttara Nikaya. Bhikkhus, there are three characteristics of what is contrived. That is Sangatasa Lakana in Pali. It would be Samskritasya Lakshana in Sanskrit. An arising, that's utpādo in Pali, utpādo in Sanskrit. An arising is recognized. A vanishing, that's vayo in Pali or Sanskrit. A vanishing is recognized. Vayo means vanishing or passing is recognized. A changing of what stands. Titasya anyatatam is recognized. That's Pali, titasa anyatatam. In Sanskrit, that would be stitasya anyatvam is recognized. So a changing of what stands is recognized. A changing of what stays still is recognized. Bhikkhus, there are three characteristics of what is not contrived. So asamskritasya. No arising is recognized, no vanishing is recognized, no changing of what stands is recognized. End of quote from the Anguttara Nikaya. But the same three phrases are mentioned again by the Buddha in Samyutta Nikaya 2237, which is the Ananda Sutta. So the Buddha's speaking to Ananda, his cousin. So these three phases in the Ananda Sutta are applied to each of the five skandhas, the five constituents of what we think of as ourself. So the Buddha asks Ananda, if Ananda, they were to ask you, friend Ananda, what are the things of which an arising is recognized, a vanishing is recognized, a changing of what stands is recognized? Being asked thus, how would you answer? Ananda then answers with reference to physicality, rupa. With physicality, the skandha of physicality, an arising is recognized, a vanishing is recognized, a changing of what stands is recognized, and so on for the other four of the five skandhas. Whereupon the Buddha affirms Ananda's way of answering. Okay, so in these two passages from the suttas, there is nothing to support the teaching of a three-phased moment of consciousness. The gist of what is said in the suttas is that if a moment of consciousness is contrived as a non-empty thing, in that case, arising is recognized. In Pali, utpādotpāda. So panyayati means it is known, is recognized, is perceived, is apparent. So utpādotpāda does not affirm that arising exists as a characteristic of what is real. On the contrary, the Buddha says that when a thing is contrived, as for example, the five skandhas are contrived, then arising is recognized. Though the commentaries to which Venerable Janayate refers were almost certainly written after Nāgārjuna's time, Nāgārjuna must have been aware of the antecedents of those commentaries, in which, through ignorance, a moment was subdivided into three phases of utpāda, sthiti, bhanga, genesis, stasis, and dissolution. So you see what Nāgārjuna's done here. He's been confronted with the bloody great mess that these Abhidhamma commentators have made by their ontological speculations about the genesis, stasis, and dissolution of a moment of consciousness, and which they've conceived as a non-empty thing, like the power of now, the all-important moment of the present. That's prapancha. So, you see, that puts the first three verses in, it kind of gives us a glimpse into Nāgārjuna's character. He started off by not with criticising, not by kind of honouring those Abhidhamma commentators by starting off with their thesis. He started off with the Buddha's thesis, but using those words, utpāda, sthiti, bhanga, which we've just encountered in verse 3. He's used those words in his own way, so that they don't express genesis, stasis, and dissolution. They express the essence of the Buddha's teaching, not an ontological speculation, but the essence, which is going up, staying still, and cessation. And he does that with reference to Samskrita Lakshanam, which below the surface means targeting, contriving. But in the speculations of ontological commentators, it has to do with characterizing a moment. Okay, so that's the background with which to read this very dry, sort of depressing, really, verse. It's so much utpādotpāda, utpādo, mūlotpādasya, kevalam. Only the genesis of the original Genesis is the genesis of Genesis. Utpādotpādam, utpādo, maulo, janayate, punaḥ. The original Genesis again begets the genesis of Genesis. To me, the person who's speaking is a regular pain in the arse. He's going on and on about Genesis without realizing that utpāda means something which is totally different from ontology. Utpāda means going up, means letting the head go forward and up to lead the whole bloody thing in the right direction. Then you're ready to go into movement. Go out and enjoy enjoy life, enjoy what's to be enjoyed, instead of pondering over this blasted verse where you've got to work out how many utpādas mean different things according to different grammar. How many times has he said it? Utpādotpāda, utpādo, mūlotpādasya, kevalam, utpādotpādam, utpādo, maulo, janayate, punaḥ. So he's used the word utpāda 7 times in one verse. So to me, there's something humorous about it. It's somehow reminiscent of J. Garfield yesterday rabbiting on about ontology. It's not about ontology. The next 3 verses will be about ontology, but only because this pain in the arse of an Abhidhamma commentator has bothered Nāgārjuna with his stupid thesis about the Big Bang.
utpādotpāda, utpādo, mūlotpādasya, kevalam, utpādotpādam, utpādo, maulo, janayate, punaḥ.